Airline companies are interested in the number of babies on each flight so that they have adequate safety equipment. Suppose an airline conducts the following survey. Over Thanksgiving weekend, 6 flights from Boston to Salt Lake City are surveyed to determine the number of babies on the flights. It determines the amount of safety equipment needed by the result of that study. Let's be sure we understand the purpose of the study. The purpose of the study is to protect babies, to have adequate safety equipment. That's a good thing. We appreciate their motive and what they're trying to do. Perhaps they could have done it better, but we appreciate what they are trying to do. So the first question we want to ask is, what's the type of data collected in the survey? We have pretty limited data. We know that the outcome is the number of babies on the flights. We have a time period, Thanksgiving weekend, and we have a route, Boston to Salt Lake City. The most important variable is the number of babies on the flight. What's that type of data? Well, that is discrete quantitative data. Number of babies. We have the route, but it's really not a variable. It's a constant. It's only Boston to Salt Lake. And we have the time period, but it's really not a variable. It's a constant. It was only done on Thanksgiving weekend. The real variable we have is the number of babies on the flights. So we think perhaps they could have done a better job. We appreciate their motive to enhance safety for babies on flights, but we think they could have done a little better job. There's at least 3 things that maybe could have been done better. One is they only chose one time period. Happens to be a highly traveled time period and a time when a lot of families travel. I think that's maybe why they were thinking that's a good way to count babies, but it really is a constant. So one thing they might have made a mistake on is having only one time period, which was high travel time. Another thing that perhaps they did wrong was having only 6 flights out of thousands that weekend. And another was having only one route. If we were to repeat this, how would we improve the survey? List 3 ways that you would improve the survey if it were to be repeated. Well, we would try and correct for what we think were things that maybe were done wrong. So we would sample many time periods. we would sample many more flights, and we would sample many more routes. So let's assuming that flight data is available and accessible from the thousands of flights and the hundreds of routes and the 50 weeks of the year, describe a sampling method that could be used to produce a representative sample to inform the airline company's safety equipment standards. Now, the truth is, because they have all those data, they may not even need the sample. They know the actual answers without a sample. But let's assume they need a sample. We would want to do a random sample of time periods, flights, and routes. We would create a random sample of many, we'll say 1,000 flights. And those flights would be sample across all 52 weeks of the year. And sample across all routes. Random sampling would avoid systematic bias. Random sampling covers a multitude of possible errors in your procedures. Obviously, the original was biased because Thanksgiving is a high travel period for families. But a random sample of weeks in the year would avoid systematic bias. One route from Boston to Salt Lake could show bias. We don't know how many families are traveling to Salt Lake, but a random sample of all routes would avoid that bias. The key would be to create random samples across those three variables.